Hello there. Today, The Berlin Stories by Christopher Isherwood. This book, The Berlin Stories, is actually two books. The first one, published in 1935, it's a bit tricky because sometimes it's known as Mr. Norris Changes Trains. It's also known as The Last of Mr. Norris. If you see Mr. Norris in the title, that's the first of the Berlin books. And the second book is called Goodbye to Berlin. The Last of Mr. Norris, published 1935. Goodbye to Berlin, 1939. Publication dates. Now that note there on the date of the publication is essential to understanding and knowing something about how this book feels. Most books that are centered around the Second World War are written after. But not this one. This one was written before, as Adolf Hitler was coming to power. He was a politician, he was very active, he was an agitator, and that is a very interesting time to be writing about for Christopher Isherwood, that he talks about Hitler as though he were talking about one of the local upstart politicians, without knowing what would be coming in the next few years. So that gives the book quite a peculiar tone. Like there's one line where he says something like, yeah, why don't we go over to the hotel where Hitler is staying and, we'll knock on his door and ask him to calm all this down. Like you wonder actually how near they were to one another, Hitler and Isherwood at that time. Like it's almost as though they were rubbing shoulders from the way he writes it. But this is not about Hitler, and it's not about fascism. It influences the book quite a lot. That's not what he writes about. In the first book, Mr. Norris Changes Trains, Christopher Isherwood is writing about this very untrustworthy man named Mr. Norris, who he meets on a train. And he strikes up a conversation, and he knows that there's something fishy about Mr. Norris, but Isherwood seems to collect these very fishy, these very duplicitous individuals. He seems to like to collect the dregs of society and call these people his friends and find out how they live, which is really an artist, like that's where you get your real art from, the people who are out there living by any means necessary. But the first book, Mr. Norris Changes Trains, that is a novel. It is a work of fiction. The character who we can assume is Christopher Isherwood is actually named William Bradshaw. Everything circles around Bradshaw. He is an ESL teacher. He has his students. He has all these oddballs that he's meeting in his spare time. He lives in a rooming house. He goes out to the nightclubs. And it's 1930s Berlin. It is like one of the most hedonistic, wild and crazy places for nightlife of the 20th century. The hedonism of Berlin at the time is legendary. And in this book, there are some of the most perfect descriptions of being drunk that I've ever read. I'm going to read you one of them. He's describing what I consider to be the ideal stage of drunkenness. Now, I have quite a lot of familiarity with the whole scope of drunkenness, from, the good stuff to the very low lows. And he's talking about probably the very best thing you could ever hope for when you take a drink. It's when you've had a couple of drinks at home to kind of get into a going out mood. You go out to the nightclub with your friends, you have more to drink, and there's just a moment where you have a drink in your hand and you look at it and you look around where you are, and an overwhelming feeling of sublime participation in the events that are in progress all around you. And you take that drink and you cease to be an observer and you become an active participant. And usually it is followed by a very jolly kind of mayhem, if you're lucky. So let me read you a moment where he's describing this and some of the night that follows. He goes out with some friends, acquaintances. I think it is New Year's Eve. In the windows were bottles filled with colored liquids, brilliantly illuminated from beneath, magenta, emerald, vermilion. They seemed to be lighting up the whole room. The cigarette smoke made my eyes smart until the tears ran down my face. The music kept dying away, then surging up fearfully loud. I passed my hand down the shiny black oilcloth curtains in the alcove behind my chair. Oddly enough, they were quite cold. The lamps were like alpine cowbells, and there was a fluffy white monkey perched above the bar. In another moment, when I had drunk exactly the right amount of champagne, I should have a vision. I took a sip, and now, with extreme clarity, without passion or malice, I saw what life really was. It had something, I remember, to do with the revolving sunshade. Yes, I murmured to myself, let them dance. They are dancing. I am glad. The events of the next 2 hours were somewhat confused. We were in a small bar where I remembered only the ruffled plumes of a paper streamer, crimson, very beautiful, stirring like seaweed in the draught from an electric fan. We wandered through streets crowded with girls who popped teasers in our faces. We ate ham and eggs in the first-class restaurant on the Friedrichstrasse station. Arthur had disappeared. The Baron was rather mysterious and sly about this, though I couldn't understand why. He had asked me to call him Kuno and explained how much he admired the character of the English upper class. Okay, then they drive for a while, and they drive, and he, he's like, God, where the hell are we going? He gets kind of sober for a little minute, and he's like, where are you taking me? Here, one of the anesthetic periods of the evening supervened. How the Baron got me upstairs, I don't know. It was quite painless. We were in a room full of people dancing, shouting, singing, drinking, shaking our hands and thumping us on the back. My glance reeled about the room, picking out large or minute objects. A bowl of claret cup in which floated an empty matchbox, a broken bead from a necklace, a bust of Bismarck on top of the Gothic dresser, holding them for an instant, then losing them again in general colored chaos. I stumbled about looking for the body and collapsed comfortably onto a sofa, holding the upper half of a girl. My face was buried in dusty, smelly lace curtains. The noise of the party burst over me in thundering waves like the sea. It was strangely soothing. Don't go to sleep, darling, said the girl I was holding. No, of course not, I won't, I replied and sat up, tidying my hair. I felt suddenly quite sober. To be young and in Europe and just up for the nightlife. There are so many scenes like that in the book that he is out there enjoying all that Berlin has to offer, especially on the seedy side. The second book, Goodbye to Berlin, seems to be straight entries from his journal, his diary, and they are more like short story vignettes. The first one is called A Berlin Diary. There's quite a famous line here. I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking. That line, I am a camera, was translated into a stage play based on these short stories. And that stage play, I am a camera, was then translated into Cabaret, the famous film starring Liza Minnelli. Through quite a circuitous manner, this Goodbye to Berlin ended up as Cabaret, quite a famous film from the 70s. This short story called Sally Bowles is just wonderful. Sally is a British woman in Berlin who is a singer and an actress, mainly trying to sleep with men for money, in the hope of it advancing her acting career, and she's rather ruthless. While I was reading this, I was just thinking, like, God, it's like people I've known, like the clarity with which he paints the picture of this woman. This one, on Rugen Island, that's quite a funny one. I won't say anything about that one, but it's very, very good. The Noax. I don't know how much truth there is to it, but I believe it is true because, like, in this second bit, Goodbye to Berlin, it's from his diary, and the character is not this Bradshaw anymore. He's actually referred to as Christopher Isherwood, and he goes to live with this family in this small, dirty, cramped, horrible little apartment where several members of the family are all crowded together, and he spends some time living with them. It's a very good story with a very strange ending. And there's this tragic story, the Landauers. The Landauers are a Jewish family, and at first he meets the daughter. He's not really interested in dating her, but it seems that he's collecting her as one of the characters that he might write about, because they go on a few dates, but they are really quite opposed to each other and they get on each other's nerves quite instantly. But it begins with this paragraph. One night in October 1930, about a month after the elections, there was a big row on the Leipziger Strasse. Gangs of Nazi roughs turned out to demonstrate against the Jews. They manhandled some dark-haired, large-nosed pedestrians and smashed the windows of all the Jewish shops. The incident was not in itself very remarkable. There were no deaths, very little shooting, no more than a couple of dozen arrests. I remember it only because it was my first introduction to Berlin politics. Imagine being alive in Berlin in 1930 and seeing that. Then finally, there's the Berlin Diary. Winter, 1932 to 1933, where things get bad and he has to go. So Christopher Isherwood, he went to Berlin to stay with his friend W.H. Auden, the famous poet. But it wasn't so much to go to visit his friend Auden. It was more because he was very keen to get to Berlin. He wanted some of the infamous gay Berlin nightlife. And he got it. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. It was quite a famous hedonistic bit of his life. From his writing, it seems as though he enjoyed himself immensely, if not to say immeasurably. Interestingly about Isherwood is that later in his life, Isherwood was reflecting on this book and didn't like the way that he was hiding his homosexuality. He felt that he was, well, doing himself an injustice and also the gay rights movement, that he was not being true to himself. Like, if you know when you read this, yes, there are moments and scenes where you know. But if you don't know, you might read it as, he's a straight man. It's possible. He just happens to have a lot of male friends, that's all. So he didn't like this. He didn't think that he was being true to himself as a gay man. And so he wrote an autobiography called Christopher and His Kind. Now, I don't believe it was very well received. I haven't read it, but it was straight out biography of his life, I believe from like 1929 to 1939. He wanted to show his life more as the way he actually lived it. A young gay man in Berlin in 1930, getting a lot of action. Even though I don't think people really like that book very much, the quality or the writing, the literary, well, at least he was true to himself, because he was quite open about his sexuality, and he wanted to correct some of the the misleading that he might have done. 1935 is an entire world away from 1975. The two worlds, you can't put them side by side and call them the same place. So, well, so good for Christopher. I have to say, I'm fascinated by is only touching on a few nightclubs and a few of the crazy characters, like so many criminals, so many, tough guys, so many smugglers and prostitutes and dominatrix. He is really dealing with some unsavory characters. But the way he portrays them, he does portray them, I thought he portrayed them rather humanely. Later in his life, he wishes that he had have been kinder to the people he was writing about, because he felt that he portrayed them as monsters. I didn't think that. I thought they were dangerous, lowlifes, but I don't think he was unkind. Like, he showed them expressing humanity. When the country is desperately poor and the economy is just trash and people are surviving by any means they possibly can, people are going to do some pretty shady things. And shall we judge them on that? The kinds of things you might have to do to keep yourself and your family alive when the world is falling apart in front of your eyes and this fascist is rising to power? Like, would you think bad of someone for stealing or any of the other things they might get up to? I love this book. It gives such a clear amazing picture of Berlin at a very specific time in history, and it just evokes so much of the reality of the world that he was existing in at that time. It really reminded me of my own life when I was a young man. I left Canada. There's no culture here, there's no history here. Like this place, it's repressed and people only give a shit about money, and there's nothing else here except people who care about money. And I hate this place, and I left. I'm back now, but that's very temporary. Yeah, when you go to another country, somehow you might find yourself behaving a little bit badly because, I don't know, for some reason the rules don't seem to apply very strictly to you. You probably know this when you go on holiday. There's a bit of extra freedom because, hey, it's not my country. They're not going to put me in jail because, I don't belong here. I'm just passing through, even though I ended up passing through Budapest for 16 years. So this book brought so much of that back to me, just that wild European freedom, especially when you're a stranger in a European country. Like everybody feels it if you've ever traveled. When you're in your 20s and you're out for the most fun you can get in Europe, nothing beats that. Nothing beats it. Of course, settle down when you're in your 30s, but when you're in your 20s, just go wild, because it's the one decade of your life where you can. And then after that, it is over. I hope that I've encouraged you to seek out this book. You know, Christopher Isherwood, I think he's quite a neglected author. I don't think he gets a lot of recognition that he deserves because he's a great writer. Like reading this book is like listening to the best storyteller in the pub. You've sat down in the pub and the guy beside you just tells you one amazing story after another, and you would sit there and listen to him all night. You would buy him drinks just to keep him talking because he's that much entertaining. And this Goodbye to Berlin was exactly like that. These incredible stories, these wild characters that he's meeting, and his take on it. Like he has such an affable, friendly, open-minded take. Even when he like that character I was talking about, that, you know, their personalities are clashing quite stridently. He still spends time with her because he kind of enjoys that. Like he just enjoys meeting this girl who annoys him. Like he smiles to himself and says, you know, isn't that funny that she can annoy me that much? You know, and I think that is just the most wonderful personality to have, especially as a writer. Just even collecting the people you don't like because, you know, they give you something to write about afterwards. That's wonderful. Patreon. $5 a month on Patreon. Your name goes on a little slip of paper and you go in here. If I pull out your name, you will win this very book. I will mail it to you. You will also win my magazine, The Friend from Budapest, which is actually quite a lot about what I'm talking about right now. They're all signed and numbered and dated. That's my writing. 36 pages, 3 short stories, 1 poem, my best poem. They've all been published. So when I pull out your name, you'll win those. Please support me on Patreon. $5 a month. Come on. You know, you can do it. Barry. G'day, mate. You drongo?
Oh, watch out, you flaming drongo! Give me such a flaming bloody drongo!
Put another shrimp on the barbie, Barry. That's not a knife. That's a knife. Yeah, Barry lives in New Zealand. Always wanted to go to New Zealand. You know, I think it would be so nice to see the little kangaroos, you know, flying from tree to tree. So Barry, congratulations. Barry supports me on Patreon. He sends me an email every once in a while. He's got a great sense of humor. I think he's going to like the Berlin stories because if I'm not mistaken, I think he told me he went to Europe some time ago and he had some fun in Europe, as everyone does. All right, Barry, so you've got that European experience. You've got this European experience. I'm going to mail that to you to New Zealand. So if I don't have your mailing address, email it to me. Pronto. If you want to buy my magazine, The Friend from Budapest, you just want to buy that, $12. Write me an email. My email address is down below. Send it to me in any way you can, and I'll mail it to you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe and please like the video. I don't know why, my subscribers are not really very big. So please subscribe, please like, please tell your friends, especially your friends that are really addicted to YouTube. Tell those friends especially. I guess if they're addicted to YouTube, they're not really going to be big readers, though, are they? How many years did I act really wild? I guess I behaved pretty wild for 6 years, right? From 2000 to 2006, I was a bit of a lunatic, really, in Budapest, but boy, it was fun, and boy, did I experience the nightclubs and the nightlife and the drinking, the staggering through the streets, the crazy parties, talking to odd people from everywhere, just being happy, buying drinks, and just let's go here, let's go there, let's go to someone's apartment who's doing something, and getting invited to places, and you know, your telephone ringing and you don't know who it is, you pick it up and it's someone that you met the other night and you don't even remember them. The wild European nights. Like, there is a very, very distinct difference between Europeans and North Americans. It is very obvious. Like, when you go there and you meet the people and you talk to them, there is something inside a European that North American people don't have. American people have it more than Canadian people do, because America actually has a culture, and America has something to call their own, whereas Canada is just a place that has borrowed a bunch of stuff from other places. We borrowed quite a bit from England in the old days, and now we borrow quite a lot of it from America, and we pretend like we don't like it because that's American. But it's bullshit. Everybody in Canada loves America. So we're really quite culturally empty. And for a Canadian to go to Europe, where people, strangers, want to tell you about historic events. Like, I cannot tell you how many, like almost every Hungarian person I met wanted to talk to me about how their parents and grandparents survived during the Soviet occupation. Everyone wanted to tell me that. And I wanted to listen to them. I would listen to that for weeks on end. Just, you know, my grandparents grew up in the village, and, you know, they were growing watermelon. And of course, the goddamn Soviets would come and take all the watermelons, and they'd say, well, you know, we need this. And so they had this secret method of growing the watermelon so that the local government wouldn't notice what they were doing, and then they would sell it on the black market, which everybody in Hungary was associated with in some manner. Like, fascinating, deep, deep culture. I really miss my European life, and I feel like I've become Canadian again, you know, just always squabbling about money and always worried about the prices. It's hard not to with the inflation going on right now.
Too bad New Zealanders are a bunch of cocky a-holes descended from criminals and retarded monkeys.
You're thinking of Australians?
Yeah, that's Australians.
That's Australians.
No, New Zealanders. They throw another shrimp on the barbie, ride around in your kangaroos all day.
No,
That's Australians.
You're thinking of Australians, that's not us.
You damn drongo. What is it? What do they say? Fair dinkum. Fair dinkum. What kind of a country says that? Jesus. No, New Zealand, they got the Maori blood.